Amara! Please! I was wrong. Truth always arrives, my king.
Chapter 1. The woman the king wanted dead. The first rays of dawn had barely touched the rooftops when the palace drums began to beat. Boom, boom, boom. The sound echoed across the kingdom like a warning from the gods themselves. Villagers abandoned their breakfast fires. Merchants left their stalls. Children stopped playing. Everyone rushed toward the royal courtyard. Something terrible was about to happen. By the time the sun climbed above the palace walls, thousands had gathered. The crowd suddenly parted. Gasps filled the air. A woman was being dragged across the stone ground by royal guards. Not just any woman. Their queen. Queen Amara. Her wrists were bound with heavy chains. Dust covered her royal robes. Blood stained one side of her face. Yet something about her seemed wrong. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She wasn't even afraid. The people whispered among themselves. What did she do? Is it true? Did she really betray the king? At the center of the courtyard stood King Adewale. His face was cold, hard, unreadable. The same man who once crossed rivers and fought wars to win Amara's heart now stared at her as if she were a stranger. The silence became unbearable. Then the king finally spoke. Queen Amara, wife of the crown and protector of this kingdom. His voice thundered across the courtyard. You stand accused of treason against the throne. The crowd exploded with shock. Some screamed. Others covered their mouths. Treason? The queen? Impossible. But the king wasn't finished. You have conspired with enemies of the kingdom. You have betrayed your people. You have betrayed your king. Each accusation struck the crowd like lightning. Still, Amara said nothing. She simply looked at him. Not with anger. Not with fear. With sadness. A sadness so deep that even some of the guards looked away. The king raised his hand. An executioner stepped forward. The giant man wore a black hood. In his hands rested a sword large enough to split a man in half. The blade caught the morning sunlight. The crowd fell silent. Everyone knew what came next. The executioner slowly lifted the sword. A woman in the crowd began to cry. An old man dropped to his knees. Children hid behind their mothers. This was the end of their queen. The executioner positioned himself. One strike. That was all it would take. But then something unexpected happened. Amara smiled. A small smile. Calm. Peaceful. Almost as if she knew something nobody else did. The executioner hesitated. The crowd stared. Even the king frowned. Amara lifted her head and looked directly into the king's eyes. Then she spoke. If I die today. Her voice was soft, but every person in the courtyard heard it. That your kingdom dies with me. The smile remained on her face. The crowd froze. The executioner lowered the sword slightly. A cold wind swept through the courtyard. For the first time that morning, fear appeared on the king's face. What did she mean? Was it a threat? A warning? Or the truth? The king's hand trembled. And for the first time since the trial began, he hesitated. Chapter 2. The woman who came from nowhere. The king's hand froze in the air. The executioner's sword remained suspended above Queen Amara's neck. Thousands of eyes stared at her. If I die today, your kingdom dies with me. The words hung over the courtyard like a dark cloud. And suddenly, King Adewale remembered the day he first saw her. Years ago. Before she became queen. Before the palace. Before the secrets. Back when she was simply a stranger who appeared from nowhere. Nobody knew exactly when she arrived. One morning, the people of Iron Village woke to find a young woman sitting beneath an ancient baobab tree near the marketplace. She carried no bags, no jewelry, no sign of wealth. Her clothes were simple and worn from travel. When curious villagers approached her, she answered their questions politely. But when they asked where she came from, she only smiled. From a place far away. Nothing more. The villagers thought she would leave after a few days. She didn't. Weeks passed. Then months. The stranger remained. People soon noticed something unusual about her. She seemed to know things she shouldn't know. One afternoon, an elderly fisherman was preparing his canoe by the river. The young woman approached him. "Don't go fishing tomorrow," she said. The fisherman laughed.
Why?
"The river will be angry." The old man shook his head and walked away. The next day, a violent storm appeared without warning. 3 canoes overturned. 2 fishermen nearly drowned. The old man survived only because he had listened to her. Word spread quickly. At first, people called it luck. Then it happened again. And again. A trader planning a long journey received a warning from her. He ignored it. Bandits attacked his caravan 2 days later. A farmer preparing to plant his crops was told to wait 1 week. He obeyed. A terrible drought arrived shortly after, destroying every nearby farm except his. The whispers began. She sees the future. The spirits speak to her. She is not an ordinary woman. Some even called her a witch. But nobody could prove anything. Whenever people questioned her, she gave the same answer. "I simply pay attention." Yet nobody believed it was that simple. As the years passed, her reputation grew. People traveled from distant villages, seeking her advice. Some came with problems. Others came with questions. Most left amazed. Then came the year the kingdom nearly starved. The rain stopped. The rivers shrank. Crops died in the fields. The ground cracked beneath the sun. Month after month, the situation worsened. Children cried from hunger. Families sold their belongings for food. Entire villages prepared for the worst. One evening, village elders gathered beneath the baobab tree. Fear filled every face. "If the rains do not come soon," one elder said, "we will all perish." The mysterious woman listened quietly. Then she stood. "There is food." The elders stared at her. "Where?" one asked. She pointed toward the western hills. "Dig there." The men exchanged confused looks. "There is nothing there," another elder said. She met his gaze.
Dig.
The next morning, dozens of villagers climbed the hills. They dug for hours. Nothing. Some began to leave. Then a young boy's shovel struck something. The sound echoed through the valley. Thud. The villagers dug faster. What they discovered shocked everyone. An enormous underground storage cave, filled with grain. Hundreds of sacks. Enough food to feed several villages for months. Nobody knew who had hidden it there. Nobody knew how she had known. But she had saved them all. News of the miracle spread across the kingdom like wildfire. Eventually, the story reached the royal palace. King Adewale listened carefully as his advisors described the mysterious woman. A stranger. No family. No past. No explanation. Yet somehow she had saved an entire village from famine. The king dismissed everyone and sat alone for a long time. For reasons he couldn't explain, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He had never met her. Yet something about the story disturbed him. Because hidden within the reports was one detail nobody seemed to notice. The woman had arrived in the kingdom only a few months before the drought began. Almost as if she had known it was coming. And that raised a question far more dangerous than any famine. Who exactly was the woman who came from nowhere? Chapter 3. A love nobody approved. The question haunted King Adewale for weeks. Who was the woman who came from nowhere? He could have ignored the stories. A king had more important things to worry about than village legends. Yet, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Every report that arrived from the villages seemed to mention her name.
Amara.
The woman who predicted storms. The woman who found hidden grain. The woman nobody truly knew. Finally, the king decided to see her for himself. Without announcing his identity, he traveled to Ayan village with only a few trusted guards. When he arrived, he expected to find a mysterious prophet surrounded by crowds. Instead, he found a young woman sitting beneath the old baobab tree, helping children solve riddles. She looked ordinary. Too ordinary. The children laughed around her. She laughed with them. There was no sign of magic. No sign of power. And yet the moment she looked at him, something strange happened. She smiled. As expected, she said. The king frowned. "What is?" "You came." A chill ran through him. The king had never met her before. Yet she spoke as though she had been waiting for him. For the first time in years, he found himself speechless. Over the following months, he returned again and again. sometimes as a king, sometimes in disguise. The more time he spent with Amara, the more fascinated he became. Unlike everyone else, she wasn't impressed by his title. She challenged him, questioned him, even laughed at him when he acted foolish. One afternoon, while walking beside the river, he asked her the question everyone wanted answered. How do you know things before they happen? Amara stared at the flowing water. For a long moment, she remained silent. Then she said softly, "The future leaves footprints." The answer only confused him more. What does that mean? She smiled. It means people rarely notice what is right in front of them.
That was all she would say.
Months became a year. And before long, the king realized something he had never expected. He was in love.
Deeply.
Hopelessly.
Completely.
When he announced his intention to marry Amara, the palace erupted. The royal elders were furious. The noble families were outraged. The kingdom's most powerful men gathered in the council chamber. "You cannot marry her," one elder declared. "We know nothing about her family," another argued. "She could be a spy, a criminal, a fraud." But none of those accusations frightened the king. Then the rumors began. Cruel rumors. Dangerous rumors. People whispered that Amara was a witch. They claimed she used dark powers to influence the king. They said she had cast a spell over him. Every day the stories grew worse. Some nobles secretly paid villagers to spread lies. Others warned that marrying her would bring disaster upon the kingdom. One elderly advisor even fell to his knees before the king. "Your Majesty, please," he begged. "This woman will destroy everything." But the king refused to listen. For the first time in his life, he chose his heart over politics. Months later, the wedding took place. Despite the opposition, despite the rumors, despite the warnings, the entire kingdom watched as King Adewale placed the royal crown upon Amara's head. The people cheered. The drums echoed across the land. And for a moment, it seemed love had won. That night, after the celebrations ended, the king and his new queen prepared to enter their private chambers. The palace corridors were quiet. The moon hung high above the kingdom. Then an unexpected voice stopped them.
"Your Majesty."
The king turned. An old blind woman stood at the end of the corridor. Nobody knew how she had entered the palace. Nobody had seen her arrive. The guards looked confused. The woman slowly walked forward, using a wooden staff. Her sightless eyes stared into darkness. Yet somehow, it felt as though she could see everything. She stopped directly in front of the newly married couple. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she pointed toward Amara. "The danger is not the woman." The king laughed softly. "I know that." But the old woman wasn't finished. She slowly turned her finger toward him. "The danger." Her voice became cold. "That is the man who loves her." The smile vanished from the king's face. The corridor fell silent. Before anyone could ask what she meant, the old woman turned and walked away. Within moments, she disappeared into the darkness.
Gone.
As if she had never been there. That night, neither the king nor the queen slept, because neither could stop thinking about the warning. What did the blind woman see? Why had she blamed the king instead of Amara? And years later, standing in the execution courtyard with his queen chained before him, King Adewale would remember those words and wonder if the old woman had known the truth all along. The danger had never been Amara. The danger had always been him. Chapter 4. The King's Dark Secret. For a while, it seemed the old blind woman's warning had been wrong. The years that followed became known as the golden years of the kingdom. The harvests were abundant. Trade flourished. New roads connected distant villages. Markets overflowed with goods. For the first time in generations, the people felt hopeful about the future. And much of the credit belonged to Queen Amara. The same woman many had once called a witch had become the most beloved queen the kingdom had ever known. She visited villages without royal escorts. She listened to farmers, traders, widows, and fishermen. When disputes arose, her advice often solved them before they became serious problems. People trusted her. More importantly, they loved her. Mothers named their daughters after her. Songs were written in her honor. Even many of the nobles who had once opposed her marriage eventually accepted her. But while the kingdom celebrated, King Adewale carried a burden nobody knew about. A secret. A terrible secret. One that haunted him every night. One that refused to stay buried. Whenever he stood before a mirror, he sometimes saw not his own reflection but the face of another man. A face that looked almost exactly like his.
His brother.
Prince Tund. Years earlier, before Amara entered his life, the kingdom had faced a crisis. Their father, the old king, had died suddenly. The throne had no clear successor. Both brothers had a claim. Both were respected. Both had powerful supporters. At first, the disagreement remained peaceful. But power has a way of turning brothers into enemies. As the months passed, tensions grew. Supporters of Prince Tund insisted he should become king. Others backed Adewale. The kingdom slowly divided itself into two camps. Then one night, everything changed. A secret meeting was arranged outside the capital. A meeting that was supposed to bring peace between the brothers. Prince Tund rode out alone. He never returned. His body was discovered the following morning near a forest road. Officially, the attack was blamed on bandits. The kingdom mourned. The investigation ended. And Adewale became king. That was the story everyone believed. But it wasn't the truth. The truth was far darker. Adewale had not killed his brother with his own hands. But he had helped make it happen. Several ambitious nobles had approached him during the succession struggle. They feared that if Tund became king, they would lose their power. Together they created a plan. A dangerous plan. At first, Adewale refused. Tund was his brother. His blood. But fear is a powerful thing. Fear of losing the throne. Fear of losing influence. Fear of becoming forgotten. Eventually, he agreed to look away. Just once. That single decision changed everything. The ambush was carried out. The prince was murdered. And Adewale inherited a crown stained with blood. For years, nobody discovered the truth. The nobles involved either died or disappeared. The secret remained buried. Or so Adewale believed. There was one problem. One witness. Only one. A young stable boy had seen the conspirators gathering on the night of the murder. He hadn't known their full plan. But he had seen enough to connect them to Prince Tund's death. The boy had grown into a man. His name was Jabari. And for years, the king secretly paid him to remain silent. Not because Jabari demanded money, but because guilt demanded it. As long as Jabari lived, the truth remained dangerous, yet somehow manageable. Then one morning everything changed. A royal messenger burst into the council chamber. The man's face was pale. His hands trembled. "Your Majesty," he said, "there is a problem." A cold feeling settled in the king's stomach. What happened? The messenger swallowed hard. "Jabari is gone." The king froze. The room suddenly felt smaller. "What do you mean gone?" "He disappeared 3 nights ago." The messenger looked terrified. His house was empty. His belongings were untouched. No signs of struggle. No signs of travel. The king rose slowly from his throne. Fear gripped his chest. Not ordinary fear. The kind of fear that comes when a ghost from your past suddenly opens its eyes. "Find him," Adewale ordered. The messenger lowered his head. "We've already searched nearby villages." "Then search farther." The king's voice thundered through the chamber. "Find him." The messenger hurried away. Silence filled the room. Adewale turned toward the window. Far below, he could see Queen Amara speaking with children in the palace gardens. She looked peaceful, untroubled, as if the world made sense. But the king knew better. Because somewhere in the kingdom, the only living witness to his greatest sin had vanished. And deep inside, a terrifying thought began to grow. What if Jabari hadn't disappeared? What if someone had taken him? What if someone had finally discovered the truth about Prince Tund? And if that was true, who was pulling the strings? Who knew his secret? And most frightening of all, were they preparing revenge? Chapter 5. The Stranger with the Scar. The disappearance of Jabari haunted King Adewale. Days passed. Then weeks. Search parties combed through forests, villages, rivers, and trading routes. Nothing. It was as if the witness had vanished from the face of the earth. The king told no one why he was so desperate to find him. Not even Queen Amara. Especially not Queen Amara. The secret of Prince Tun's death was something he had buried long ago. Or at least he thought he had. Then the stranger arrived. He appeared at the northern gate on a rainy afternoon. Alone. Mounted on a black horse. A long spear rested across his back. A sword hung at his side. His face was partly hidden beneath a hood. The guard stopped him immediately. "State your business." The stranger slowly lifted his head. Several guards exchanged nervous glances. There was something unsettling about him. Something familiar. His face was hard and weathered from years of battle. But it wasn't his face that caught their attention. It was the scar. A long scar ran from his left temple to his jaw. The exact same scar Prince Tund had carried since childhood after a hunting accident. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Word spread quickly through the capital. By sunset, people were already whispering, "The warrior looks like the dead prince. Maybe he's a relative. Maybe he's a ghost." Nobody knew his real name. He called himself Malik. Nothing more. The stranger rented a small house near the edge of the city and kept mostly to himself. But people noticed something strange. Powerful men began visiting him. Secretly. Late at night. Nobles who normally hated each other suddenly found reasons to meet in private. Merchants slipped through dark alleys. Former military commanders arrived wearing cloaks to hide their identities. Questions spread through the kingdom. Answers did not. One evening, the king received a report. A trusted spy stood before him. "We've been watching the stranger." Adewale leaned forward. "What have you learned?" "Very little." The spy hesitated. "But he meets with influential people."
Why?
"We don't know." The king's jaw tightened. "Find out." The spy nodded. Yet even the kingdom's best spies struggled to uncover anything. It was as if the stranger anticipated every move they made. Every question led nowhere. Every lead ended in silence. Then the attacks began. The first target was a royal supply convoy. Bandits ambushed it near the eastern road. Several guards were killed. The supplies vanished. At first, officials assumed it was ordinary robbery. Then a second attack occurred. A government warehouse was burned to the ground. A week later, rebels attacked a border outpost. Soon, violence began spreading throughout the kingdom. The people grew frightened. The king grew suspicious. Someone was organizing these attacks. Someone intelligent. Someone patient. Someone with a plan. As the kingdom struggled to understand what was happening, another disturbing discovery emerged. Evidence. Small pieces at first. A message intercepted by royal guards. A servant's testimony. A suspicious payment made from palace accounts. Each clue pointed toward the same person. Queen Amara. The king refused to believe it. At first, the accusations seemed ridiculous. Why would the queen sabotage the kingdom she helped build? Why would she betray her own people? But the evidence continued growing. One morning, a royal messenger arrived carrying a sealed letter. The letter allegedly contained secret instructions sent to rebel groups. At the bottom was Amara's royal seal. The king stared at it for a long time. His stomach twisted. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Yet the seal appeared genuine. Later that week, another witness came forward. Then another. Then another. Each story painted the same picture. The queen was secretly working against the crown. The king desperately wanted to dismiss the claims. But doubt had entered his mind. And doubt is a dangerous seed. Once planted, it grows quickly. Meanwhile, Queen Amara seemed strangely calm.
Too calm.
Whenever reports reached her ears, she simply listened. She never appeared angry. She never demanded punishment for her accusers. She never even defended herself. That frightened the king more than anything. One evening, he confronted her. "People are accusing you." "I know. They claim you're involved in these attacks." "I know." Adewale stared at her. "Why aren't you angry?" Amara looked toward the setting sun. For a moment, sadness crossed her face. Then she answered softly. Because the truth doesn't fear lies. The answer should have reassured him. Instead, it made him uneasy. Later that night, another report arrived. A spy had followed one of the nobles meeting secretly with a stranger. The noble led him to an abandoned building outside the city. There, hidden beneath loose floorboards, the spy discovered something shocking. A collection of documents, maps, messages, and several letters carrying Queen Amara's seal. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Yet one question remained. If Amara was innocent, who was planting the evidence? And if she was guilty?
Why?
Far across the city, the mysterious warrior stood alone beneath the moonlight. In his hand, he held a small silver pendant. Inside was a faded portrait of Prince Tund, the dead prince. The warrior stared at the image for a long time. His expression hardened. Then he whispered 3 words. They will pay. The wind carried the words into the darkness. And somewhere deep inside the palace, a conspiracy years in the making moved one step closer to its final stage. Chapter 6. The Trap Closes. The kingdom was changing. Not openly. Not yet. But beneath the surface, something dark was spreading. Like a snake moving through tall grass. Invisible. Silent.
Deadly.
King Adewale felt it everywhere he went. In the palace corridors. In the council chamber. In the whispers that stopped whenever he entered a room. The attacks across the kingdom continued. More supply caravans vanished. More government buildings were sabotaged. More rumors filled the streets. And with every passing day, more evidence pointed toward Queen Amara. The king hated it. He wanted the accusations to be false. He needed them to be false. But the pile of evidence kept growing. One morning, the captain of the royal guard entered the throne room carrying a wooden box. His face was grim. "We found these, Your Majesty." The king opened the box. His heart sank. Inside were dozens of letters. Secret correspondence. Messages discussing attacks, sabotage, and rebellion. Each one appeared to bear Queen Amara's royal seal. Adewale picked up one letter. His hands trembled. The writing seemed authentic. The seal looked genuine. Everything appeared real. Too real. Where were these found? He asked. In the home of a captured rebel. The king closed his eyes. The room suddenly felt suffocating. Another piece of evidence. Another reason to doubt. Yet deep inside, something still felt wrong. Amara had never shown any desire for power. She had never lied to him. At least not that he knew. But doubt was becoming harder to ignore. Then came the servants. People who had worked in the palace for years. People the king trusted. One by one, they stepped forward with disturbing stories. A maid claimed she had seen the queen meeting strangers after midnight. A messenger claimed he had delivered secret messages on her behalf. A palace guard swore he had overheard conversations about rebellion. Each testimony sounded convincing. Each witness appeared sincere. Each accusation drove another crack into the king's faith. The queen listened to every accusation without interruption, without anger, without fear, without explanation. That silence disturbed everyone, especially the king. Then something happened that shocked the entire palace. A woman named Zainab came forward. The moment people heard her name, whispers spread through the room, because everyone knew who she was. Zainab was Amara's closest friend. For years they had been inseparable. Before Amara became queen, before the palace, before the crown, they had trusted each other completely. If anyone would defend the queen, it should have been Zainab. Instead, she stood before the royal council and lowered her head. Tears filled her eyes. I wish this wasn't true. The room became silent. The king stared. Amara remained motionless. Zainab took a shaky breath. I saw her meeting people in secret. A gasp swept through the chamber. The king felt his stomach twist.
No.
Not Zainab. Anyone but her. Yet the woman continued. I stayed silent because she was my friend. Her voice broke. But I can no longer ignore what I've seen. The council erupted into chaos. Nobles shouted. Advisors demanded punishment. The accusations had reached a new level. If even Amara's closest friend had turned against her, what was the king supposed to believe? All eyes shifted toward the queen. This was her chance. Her moment. Finally, she would defend herself. Finally, she would explain everything. Finally, she would expose the lies. The king looked at her, waiting, hoping,
Begging.
say something.
Please.
Instead, Amara simply stood,
Calm. Composed.
almost peaceful. The silence stretched across the room. 1 minute, then another. The tension became unbearable. Finally, the king spoke. Amara. His voice was softer than anyone expected. Tell us the truth. For the first time, her eyes met his. The sadness inside them nearly broke him. Then she smiled. Not because she was happy, because she seemed to pity him. Truth walks slowly, she said softly. The entire room leaned forward.
She paused.
Then finished. But it always arrives. Nothing else. No explanation. No defense. No denial. Just those words. The council exploded with outrage. People shouted over one another. The nobles demanded immediate punishment. Some called for imprisonment. Others demanded execution. The king barely heard them. His attention remained fixed on Amara. Why wasn't she fighting back? Why wasn't she defending herself? An innocent person would be furious. An innocent person would expose the lies. An innocent person would do something. Yet she remained calm, as if she already knew how this story would end. That night, Adewale sat alone in his chambers. Sleep refused to come. His mind replayed every accusation, every testimony, every piece of evidence, every unanswered question. Then another thought entered his mind. A terrifying thought. What if the trap wasn't closing around Amara? What if it was closing around him? Far beyond the palace walls, the mysterious warrior named Malik stood among a group of shadowy figures. One of them handed him a message. After reading it, Malik smiled.
For the first time.
The king is beginning to doubt her, one man said. Malik folded the letter carefully.
Good.
The next stage? The warrior's eyes hardened. He looked toward the distant palace glowing beneath the moonlight. Now, he said quietly, we take everything from him. And somewhere in the darkness, unseen by all of them, someone watched. Someone who knew the truth. Someone who had been waiting patiently. Because truth walked slowly. But it was getting closer. Chapter 7. The day love died. The day arrived beneath a gray sky. Heavy clouds hung over the kingdom. Even the wind seemed uneasy. By sunrise, thousands of people had gathered outside the palace. Word had spread quickly. The king was finally going to make his decision. For weeks the kingdom had been consumed by rumors, accusations, and fear. Now everyone wanted answers. The royal courtyard filled with nobles, soldiers, merchants, and villagers. Some came out of curiosity. Others came hoping to witness justice. A few came simply to see the fall of a queen. At the center of the courtyard stood King Adewale. His royal robes felt heavier than armor. His eyes were tired. For many nights, he had wrestled with doubt, with memories, with questions that refused to leave him alone. But every path seemed to lead to the same conclusion. The evidence, the witnesses, the letters, the betrayals. Everything pointed toward Amara, even if part of his heart still refused to believe it. The palace doors opened. Queen Amara emerged. Chains circled her wrists, yet she walked with her head held high. The crowd erupted into whispers. Some stared with pity, others with hatred. A few even smiled. The queen stepped forward and faced the people she had served for years. Not once did she lower her eyes. Not once did she appear afraid. The king looked at her. For a moment, memories flooded his mind. The first day beneath the baobab tree. Their walks beside the river. Their wedding. The promises they had made to each other. The children they had raised together. Years of love. Years of trust. Years of happiness. And now this. A silence settled over the courtyard. Everyone waited. Finally, the king spoke. His voice echoed against the palace walls. After careful consideration of the evidence presented before the throne, he paused. The words nearly caught in his throat. Did I find Queen Amara guilty of treason against the kingdom? A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The The sentence felt unreal, as though the world itself had stopped breathing. The king forced himself to continue. Until the date of her execution, she shall remain imprisoned beneath the royal palace. The moment the words left his mouth, something inside him shattered. He felt it, the breaking, the final destruction of something precious. Amara simply nodded, as if she had expected this outcome all along. Then a cry pierced the silence.
No.
Everyone turned. Two young figures ran into the courtyard. Prince Kofi, Princess Zara, the king's children, the queen's children, their children. Soldiers rushed forward, but it was too late. The prince dropped to his knees before his father. Tears streamed down his face. "Father, please." His voice cracked. Mother would never do this. Princess Zara clung to the king's arm. "Please don't take her away." The entire courtyard watched. Many wiped tears from their eyes. Even hardened soldiers looked away. But the king stood frozen, because if he listened to his children, he feared he would break completely. And so he did the cruelest thing he had ever done. He ignored them. "Take the queen away." The words sounded cold, heartless. The prince stared at him in disbelief. The princess began to sob. Amara looked at her children one last time. Then she allowed the guards to lead her away. Without resistance, without complaint, without fear. As the prison gates closed behind her, something strange happened. Parts of the crowd began cheering. Not everyone, but enough. People who had believed the rumors celebrated. Some shouted that justice had finally been served. Others claimed the kingdom had been saved. The king heard every word. Each one felt like a knife. That evening, the palace felt emptier than it ever had before. The laughter was gone. The warmth was gone. Even the servants moved quietly through the halls, as though they sensed something terrible had happened. Because it had. The queen was gone, and with her, the heart of the palace. Late that night, unable to sleep, King Adewale stood alone on his balcony. The kingdom stretched beneath him.
Dark. Silent.
Restless. His thoughts returned again and again to Amara's face. Not angry, not hateful, just sad. Why had she never defended herself? Why had she accepted her fate so easily? The questions tormented him. Then he heard it. A voice.
Soft.
Barely louder than the wind. Coming from somewhere beyond his chamber. The king turned sharply. "Who's there?" No answer. Only silence. Then the whisper came again. Closer this time. Cold enough to freeze his blood. "Now it begins." Adewale rushed forward. The corridor outside his chamber was empty. No guards. No servants. No shadows moving in the darkness. Nothing. Yet he knew what he had heard. The voice had been real. Very real. A chill crawled down his spine. Because deep inside he suddenly understood something. The imprisonment of Queen Amara had never been the end of the story. It was the beginning. Far away, in a hidden location beyond the capital, the warrior Malik stood before a fire. A messenger arrived and bowed. "The queen has fallen." Malik smiled. A dark smile filled with years of hatred. Years of waiting. Years of planning.
"Good," he said.
The messenger lowered his head. "What happens now?" Malik stared into the flames. His eyes reflected the fire like burning coals. Then he answered. "The king has finally opened the door." The messenger frowned. "To what?" Malik's smile widened. "To his destruction." Chapter 8. The kingdom starts to collapse. At first, the changes were small, easy to ignore, easy to explain away. A delayed shipment here, a failed harvest there. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. At least, that was what the king's advisors told him. But within weeks, the problems began multiplying, like cracks spreading through the walls of a house. Slowly, then all at once. The first major blow came from the farms. Across the kingdom, crops started failing. Fields that had produced abundant harvests for years suddenly withered beneath the sun. Farmers reported strange infestations. Others complained that seeds weren't growing. Entire villages watched helplessly as their food supplies disappeared. Soon, food prices doubled, then tripled. Fear spread faster than the drought itself. The people began asking questions. Questions nobody could answer. Then came the trade routes. For generations, merchants had traveled safely through the kingdom's roads. Now caravans stopped arriving. One route after another fell silent. Some traders vanished completely. Others returned with stories of ambushes and attacks. Bandits seemed to appear everywhere. Merchants became afraid to travel. Markets grew emptier each week. The kingdom's prosperity began slipping away. And still the problems kept coming. Then disease arrived. It started in a small village near the southern border. A fever. Nothing more. Or so people thought. Within days, dozens were sick. Within weeks, hundreds. Soon entire communities were affected. The royal healers worked day and night. But the illness continued spreading. Fear gripped the kingdom. People locked themselves inside their homes. Parents refused to let children play outside. Everywhere the king looked, he saw panic. And beneath it all, a terrible question. Had Queen Amara been right? Had her fall somehow triggered the kingdom's collapse? Adewale hated the thought, but he couldn't escape it. Then came the attacks. Real attacks. Not on caravans. Not on warehouses. On people. Border towns began sending desperate messages to the capital. Armed rebels were attacking settlements, burning buildings, stealing supplies, killing soldiers. Each attack seemed carefully planned, organized, coordinated. Whoever led them knew exactly where to strike. The kingdom was under siege, and the enemy appeared invisible. One evening, exhausted and frustrated, the king gathered his advisors. He demanded answers. Instead, he received excuses. The same excuses he had heard for months. Until finally something happened. A young royal accountant stepped forward. The man looked terrified. "Your Majesty," he said. The room fell silent. "What is it?" the king asked. The accountant swallowed hard. "I need to show you something." Several hours later, Adewale sat alone staring at a collection of records. His blood ran cold. The numbers didn't lie. His advisors had been deceiving him. For months, reports had been altered. Information had been hidden. Warnings had been buried. Money had disappeared from government accounts. Critical intelligence had never reached the throne. The king felt sick. Some of the men he trusted most had been feeding him lies. The realization struck him like a spear. If they lied about this, what else had they lied about? His thoughts immediately turned to Amara. The accusations. The letters. The witnesses. The evidence. For the first time, genuine fear entered his heart. Not fear of rebellion. Not fear of losing power. Fear that he had made a terrible mistake. Then something even stranger began happening. People started dying. One by one. The first was the palace guard who claimed he overheard the queen plotting treason. He was found dead in his home. No signs of struggle. No wounds. No explanation. A week later, the servant who testified against Amara died in her sleep. Then another witness. Then another. Each death seemed impossible. Each victim had one thing in common. They had all helped condemn the queen. Panic spread through the palace. Servants whispered about curses. Soldiers spoke of spirits. Some claimed Queen Amara was taking revenge from her prison cell. Others believed darker forces were at work. The king refused to believe such stories. Yet he couldn't explain what was happening. The deaths continued. And with every funeral, his confidence crumbled further. One night, unable to sleep, Adewale walked through the palace corridors alone. The shadows felt different now. Longer. Darker. More threatening. As he passed an empty hallway, he suddenly heard voices. Two servants speaking quietly. They didn't know he was nearby. "Do you think the queen was innocent?" One whispered. The other hesitated. Then answered. "I don't know." A pause. "But if she wasn't, why are all the witnesses dying?" The king stopped walking. His heart pounded, because it was the same question haunting him. If Amara was guilty, why would someone silence the people who testified against her? But if she was innocent, then someone had spent years creating the perfect trap. And he had walked directly into it. Far beyond the capital, hidden inside an abandoned fortress, Malik stood before a map of the kingdom. Several towns were marked. Several names were crossed out. A messenger approached. "The latest witness is dead." Malik nodded, as if he expected it. The messenger hesitated. Who is killing them? For the first time, uncertainty crossed Malik's face, because even he didn't know, and that frightened him more than he wanted to admit. Somewhere, someone else was moving pieces on the board. Someone neither he nor the king could see. And whoever it was, they were getting closer. Chapter 9. The secret hidden for 20 years. The truth arrived on a stormy night. Not with trumpets, not with fanfare, but with a dying man. Rain hammered against the palace roof as guards rushed into the throne room carrying an injured prisoner. The man was barely conscious. Blood covered his clothes. His breathing was weak. King Adewale immediately recognized him.
Jabari.
The witness who had disappeared months ago. The only living man who knew the truth about Prince Tun's death. The king rose from his throne so quickly that it nearly toppled. Who found him? A patrol near the western forest, Your Majesty. The king knelt beside the wounded man. Jabari. The man's eyes slowly opened. Fear filled them. Not fear of death. Fear of what he knew. For 20 years, he had carried a secret powerful enough to destroy a kingdom. And now he could carry it no longer. "They found me," Jabari whispered. "Who?" The old witness coughed painfully. "The prince's blood." A cold chill swept through the room. The king felt his heart stop. "What are you talking about?" Jabari grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "You were supposed to know." "Know what?" The man's eyes filled with sorrow. Malik. The name hung in the air. The mysterious warrior. The stranger with the scar. The man whose rebellion was tearing the kingdom apart. Jabari struggled to speak. Then the words finally came. "He's Tun's son." Silence. Absolute silence. The king stared at him, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to accept what he had just heard. Prince Tund had a son? That was impossible. The prince had died 20 years ago. Everyone knew that. Yet suddenly so many pieces began fitting together. The scar, the hatred, the secret meetings, the rebellion, the attacks, the revenge. It all made sense. The dying man nodded weakly. Tund had a child. Adewale felt the room spinning around him. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because only a few people knew." Jabari's voice faded. After the murder, loyal servants smuggled the boy away. The king closed his eyes. 20 years. For 20 years, the child had lived. For 20 years, he had grown up hearing stories about his father's death. For 20 years, he had waited, preparing, planning, hating. The king suddenly understood. Malik wasn't fighting for power. He wasn't fighting for the throne. He was fighting for revenge. Then another question struck him. One far more painful. How did Amara become involved? Jabari looked toward the window. Rain poured down outside. His expression changed. For the first time, he smiled sadly. The queen knew. The king froze. What? She discovered the truth years ago. The words hit harder than any sword.
No.
Jabari nodded. She knew Malik was alive. The king's heart pounded.
Then why didn't she tell me?
The old witness stared directly into his eyes. Because she was protecting you. The room fell silent. Every sound seemed to disappear. Jabari continued. She knew what would happen if the truth came out. The king struggled to speak. What do you mean? The kingdom would split apart. Jabari coughed again. Some would support you. Others would support Tun's son. The king understood immediately. Civil war. Thousands dead. The kingdom destroyed. Amara had seen the danger. And she had chosen silence. Not for herself. For him. For the kingdom. The realization crushed him. Every accusation. Every lie. Every witness. Every piece of evidence. It had all been a trap. And Amara had known. She had known exactly who was behind it. She had known why it was happening. Yet she had refused to expose Malik. Because exposing him would reveal the king's role in Prince Tun's murder. She had protected the man who betrayed her. Even as he condemned her. Even as he imprisoned her. Even as he prepared to execute her. Tears filled Adewale's eyes. For the first time in many years, the letters, they were fake. The witnesses, paid or threatened. The rebellion, Malik's revenge. The king lowered his head. Every terrible truth had finally arrived. Amara had never betrayed him. Not once. She had sacrificed herself to protect him. The room suddenly felt unbearable. Adewale stood, his face pale, his hands trembling. The execution. It was scheduled for sunrise. Only a few hours remained. He turned toward the captain of the guard. "Prepare my horse." The captain blinked. "Your Majesty?" Adewale's voice broke. "We've made a terrible mistake." Outside, thunder shook the sky. The king looked toward the prison tower where Amara waited. Alone.
Condemned.
Innocent. And for the first time since this nightmare began, fear truly entered his heart. Not fear of Malik. Not fear of rebellion. Not fear of losing his throne. Fear that he was already too late. Fear that the woman he loved would die before he could save her. And even if he reached her in time, would she ever forgive him? Chapter 10. The Wrong Woman. "Prepare my horse." King Adewale's voice echoed through the palace. Servants ran. Guards scrambled. The entire palace seemed to awaken at once. Outside, the storm raged across the kingdom. Thunder shook the sky. Rain poured from dark clouds. But the king barely noticed. Only one thought filled his mind. Amara. She was innocent. She had always been innocent. And he had condemned her. Minutes later, he raced through the palace gates with a squadron of royal guards behind him. His horse thundered across the muddy road toward the execution grounds. Faster. Faster.
Please. Not yet.
For years Amara had protected him. For years she had carried the burden of a secret. For years she had shielded him from enemies he never even knew existed. And he had rewarded her with chains. The execution platform appeared in the distance. A crowd had already gathered despite the storm. The king's heart sank.
No. No. No.
He pushed his horse harder. People turned as they heard the pounding hooves. The crowd began moving aside. The king jumped from his horse before it had fully stopped. "Stop." His voice tore through the air. "Stop the execution." The crowd gasped. The executioner froze. For a moment, hope filled the king's heart. Then he saw the platform, and his world shattered. Queen Amara lay motionless. The chains had already been removed. A white cloth covered her body. The execution had ended moments before his arrival. The king staggered forward. His legs felt weak. His breathing became uneven. Someone was speaking to him. A guard. An advisor. He couldn't hear them. All sounds seemed distant. The only thing he could see was Amara. He climbed the platform slowly. Then he dropped to his knees beside her. With trembling hands, he lifted the cloth. Her face looked peaceful, as if she were sleeping, as if she might open her eyes at any moment and smile. But she didn't. She never would again. Adewale lowered his head, and for the first time since he became king,
He cried.
not as a ruler, not as a warrior, but as a broken man. Hours later, after the crowd had dispersed, an elderly prison guard approached him. "Your Majesty." The king looked up. The old man held a folded letter. "She asked me to give you this after her death." Adewale stared at the letter. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was Amara's handwriting. The sight alone nearly broke him. He began to read. "My husband, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I know the truth has finally reached you. I knew it would. Truth walks slowly, but it always arrives. You will spend many years asking why I remained silent. The answer is simple. Because I loved you. I loved you when the kingdom hated me. I loved you when the palace doubted me. And I loved you even when you stopped trusting me. I discovered your secret years ago. I knew what happened to Prince Tund. I knew Malik was alive. I knew revenge was coming. But exposing the truth would have destroyed the kingdom. So I chose silence. Not because you deserved it. Because our people deserved peace. There is something else you must know. Many times over the years, I protected you from enemies you never saw. Plots were uncovered. Assassins were stopped. Traitors were exposed. You slept peacefully because I stayed awake. And I would have continued protecting you until my final breath. Do not waste your remaining years hating yourself. But do remember this. The day you stop trusting me is the day you lose your crown. The letter ended there. The king read it again, and again, and again. Each word cut deeper than a blade. Then the horns sounded. War horns. The kingdom was under attack. Malik had launched his final assault. The rebellion struck the capital before sunset. Fires erupted across the city. Soldiers battled in the streets. Chaos consumed the kingdom. For 3 days and 3 nights, fighting raged. The greatest battle in the kingdom's history. When the dust finally settled, Malik stood face to face with King Adewale. The nephew stared at the man responsible for his father's death. The king stared at the living consequence of his greatest sin. Neither spoke. Words were no longer necessary. The battle that followed was brutal. Years of hatred collided in a single moment. When it finally ended, Malik lay defeated. The rebellion collapsed. The kingdom survived. But victory felt empty, because the person Adewale wanted to save was already gone. The months that followed were worse. Far worse. The people learned the truth. They learned about Prince Tund. They learned about the conspiracy. They learned about Amara's innocence. Their grief quickly turned to anger. The beloved queen was dead. And the king was responsible. Even his children could not forgive him. Prince Kofi left the capital. Princess Zara refused to speak to him. The palace became silent, lonely, cold. Every room reminded him of Amara. Every corridor carried her memory. Every sunrise brought fresh regret. Then 6 months later, the prophecy came true. The nobles removed him from power. The people supported it. No army defended him. No friends stood beside him. No family remained. The crown was taken. The throne was lost. And the kingdom passed into other hands. Years later, an old man sat beside a lonely grave on a distant hillside. The once mighty King Adewale was now forgotten by most of the world. His hair had turned white. His hands shook with age. The grave before him belonged to Queen Amara, the woman he loved, the woman he betrayed, the woman who had spent her life protecting him. A gentle wind moved through the grass. The old king touched the weathered stone. Tears filled his eyes. At last he understood the truth. He had spent years believing his enemies destroyed him. Malik, the rebels, the conspirators, the traitors. But they had not been the ones who ruined his life. The real enemy had been much closer. It had been his fear, his doubt, his inability to trust the one person who truly loved him. He never lost his kingdom when the rebellion began. He lost it the moment he betrayed Amara. The old king lowered his head and whispered the words that would become his final confession. I chose the wrong woman to betray. The wind carried his voice across the hillside. And somewhere beyond the reach of regret, beyond the reach of crowns and kingdoms, the truth finally rested in peace. The sun was setting when the old king made his final visit to the forgotten grave. There was no throne beside him, no royal guards, no kingdom waiting for his return. His children were gone. His friends were gone. His crown was gone. Only regret remained. For a long time, he sat in silence, staring at the weathered stone that carried Amara's name. The woman who had loved him until the end. The woman he had failed. Tears filled his tired eyes. Then he whispered softly, I chose the wrong woman to betray. A gentle wind swept across the hillside and carried away his final words, leaving only silence behind.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share, comment and subscribe to African Tales Unfold. 2 Game Creatives.